Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, True Scary Stories. Where are you watching from tonight, and what time is it in your country? Have you shared my channel with your friends yet, or are you keeping these whispers all to yourself? You're settling in, aren't you? Tugging the blanket up to your chin, maybe checking that the closet door is properly latched. That's good, you should be comfortable, because tonight, comfort is exactly what we're going to dismantle, piece by quiet piece. Tonight we're talking about a house, your house, and a glow that came from the inside. A terrifying, cheerful illumination that seemed to defy the simple physics of electricity and dread. The story starts the moment you pull up the driveway of your new place, the old Blackwood residence, on the cusp of October. It's late, the air is thick with that damp, metallic smell that promises winter, and the porch light, a single weak yellow eye, is the only thing breaking the oppressive black of the surrounding trees. You can practically hear the house exhale as you cut the engine. It's got a classic, slightly aggressive Victorian profile, tall and narrow, with a widow's walk up top that seems to be glaring at the moon. It looks like it's been waiting, maybe for you, maybe for something else. Either way, you're about to be the star of its show. I wouldn't worry about getting sleep after this one. You probably won't survive the first act, let alone be rested for the morning. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you are and what time it is right now in the comments. I like knowing just how far these stories travel, how many lonely, shadowed rooms they find their way into. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that low, unsettling hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step out of the car, and the crunch of gravel under your boots sounds deafeningly loud, a rude interruption to the neighborhood's deep silence. The town, as you already know, is obsessed with Halloween. It's the kind of place where people don't just put up decorations, they engineer entire elaborate seasonal realities, starting in early September. Yet, your house, the Blackwood place, is a picture of funereal restraint. It's dark, dead quiet. The paint is peeling, not in a charmingly rustic way, but in strips that look like old, dry skin. The windows are narrow, high, and completely opaque with dust. The realtor called it historically authentic. But your immediate thought is that it looks less like a home and more like an enormous, upright coffin. You tell yourself it's just the darkness, just the stress of the move. You grab the first box, the one marked Essentials, and you head for the front door, the key feeling huge and cold in your hand. You push the door open, and the smell hits you, a dry, cold scent of forgotten wood, dust, and something indefinably sweet, like very old, dried flowers. It's the smell of a place that hasn't had air exchanged in years. The light switches inside are useless. The power isn't fully connected yet, you'd been warned. You fumble with your phone's flashlight, and the beam cuts through the gloom, momentarily illuminating the vast, empty space of the foyer. The floorboards moan under your weight, a predictable, comforting sound, the kind of domestic sound that horror movies rely on. But something about this house's groan feels deeper, more drawn out. It feels like a breath. You set the box down and walk through the lower level. Every room is the same. High ceilings, peeling wallpaper, a pattern of faded crimson roses that somehow seems to writhe in the weak beam of light, and a crushing, heavy silence. You notice a detail in the dining room, a small, almost invisible scorch mark on the pristine white plaster of the ceiling, directly above where a chandelier would hang. It's subtle, but it catches your eye, a small, dark blemish on an otherwise untouched surface. You brush it off as an old electrical fault. Just a little character, you think, trying to inject some levity into the situation, but your joke lands flat in the tomb-like air. You try another one. Well, at least I won't need to buy a smoke detector. This house is already fire-tested. You can practically hear the silence judging your efforts. It's an odd feeling, being alone in a house this large. You're no stranger to dark history. Did you know that the infamous Mary Celeste, a brigantine that was found completely deserted in the Atlantic Ocean in 1872 with all sails set and the crew's personal belongings still intact, remains one of history's most baffling maritime mysteries? Nothing about the ship was damaged, the cargo was mostly in order, yet every single soul was gone. It's the same hollow, inexplicable emptiness you feel walking up the main staircase. Everything is perfectly in place, yet the life is absent. You reach the second floor, and the temperature drops perceptibly. You also recall a more obscure tidbit about certain rural superstitions, the belief that a house's attic is a kind of spiritual filter, catching the dreams and regrets of every person who has ever slept beneath it. Some folklore holds that if you sleep with your door open, the attic dust of old sorrow can seep into your room. You can practically feel that dust clinging to the air up here. You find the master bedroom. It's enormous, with 3 tall windows that look out onto the dark, tangled backyard. You decide to start here. You drop your box and turn to look back down the long, shadowed hallway. It's like looking into a long, empty throat. You consider the previous owners, the Blackwoods. They were the last family to live here, and the town is suspiciously vague about their departure. Historians still argue whether the mass hysteria of the Salem witch trials was truly rooted in religious fanaticism, or was simply a reaction to a deadly combination of political instability and rye grain contaminated with a hallucinogenic fungus. It's all just interpretation, isn't it? Just like you're trying to interpret the faint, almost musical creak you hear coming from the floorboards directly above you, the attic. Great, you whisper to the empty room. An old house and it has a ghost. That's just super. I guess I'll have to put up a no soliciting sign for the afterlife. You decide you are too tired to investigate a cliché haunted attic on your first night. You just need to find the sleeping bag, and that requires opening boxes, so you start. You unpack toothbrushes, phone chargers, and a battered old copy of a classic horror novel. You're tired, you're alone, and your new home already feels like it's wearing your patience down like sandpaper. You're too exhausted to be afraid, and maybe that's the most dangerous state of all. You know you need to sleep, even with the faint, unsettling impression that the house is holding its breath right along with you. You slide into the sleeping bag on the dusty bedroom floor, the single air mattress you had planned on using still packed away in a box you're too drained to find. The house settles around you, not with the gentle clicks and pops of cooling wood, but with a deep structural sigh, the sound of ancient lumber shifting its weight. Every shadow in the room feels three-dimensional, not just an absence of light, but a physical presence leaning against the walls. You drift off in fits and starts, your dreams filled with fragmented images of peeling paint and the faint, sweet smell you can't place. The morning is gray, not bright, but it's an improvement. You can see the grime now, the years of neglect that the darkness had simply rendered as mystery. You spend the first hour with a lukewarm coffee, staring out the back windows. The backyard is an impenetrable tangle of dead vines and gnarled, sickly-looking trees. The entire property line is obscured by an overgrown hedge so tall it looks like a green living wall. You think about all the landscaping you'll need to do, the sheer effort of cutting back so many years of organic ambition. It's a Sisyphean task, and you can only manage a grim morning before the battle joke. I thought about starting a garden, but my therapist said I needed to stop taking things so personally. You realize quickly how absurdly small the life you'd packed up seems in this vast, echoing space. Your boxes labeled kitchen, books, memories feel alien, like small, brightly colored containers dropped into a museum vault. Each box you open releases a small puff of your former life, instantly swallowed by the house's cold, dry air. You haul them up the narrow, winding service staircase at the back of the house, which leads directly from the pantry up to a small landing on the second floor. It's here, next to the landing, where the access door to the attic is. A heavy, old door, bolted shut from the outside with a thick iron latch that looks medieval. You pause, looking at the bolt. You didn't ask about the attic. The realtor never mentioned it. You figure you should at least peek. You slide the bolt back, the sound of grating metal screaming through the quiet house. You pull the door open, and a rush of air escapes, thick with that same cold, sweet dust smell, but stronger now, almost cloying. You use your foam light again. It's too far from the central wiring for the electrician to have done much and illuminate the attic stairs. The rickety, unpainted planks disappearing into a large, dark maw. You climb, carefully, placing your weight near the joists. The attic itself is a vast, triangular space, choked with cobwebs and the debris of a century. Most of it is empty. But in the very center, under a single, narrow, peak-roof window, is a stack of forgotten boxes and trunks. These, you realize with a cold little jolt in your stomach, are not yours. They belong to the Blackwoods. You walk over, kicking up plumes of dust. The boxes are old cardboard, brittle with age, tied with dried-out twine. The trunks are heavy, dark wood. You open the first box. It's filled with ancient, yellowed newspapers detailing local events from the 1960s and 70s. You find another. This one contains Halloween decorations, not the cheap plastic store-bought kind, but handmade, intricate pieces. There are brittle tissue paper skeletons, carefully folded, and dozens of oddly shaped pumpkin faces, all slightly too large, with unsettling, uneven grins. There's a collection of hand-drawn electrical diagrams, meticulously detailed blueprints for wiring schematics that seem far too complex for Christmas lights. You pick up one of the pumpkin faces. Its eyes are hollow cutouts, but they seem to catch the dim light and hold it. It's a peculiar kind of dedication, this collection. Most people throw out old decorations. The dedication strikes you as less like holiday enthusiasm and more like an intense, obsessive hobby. You're reminded of the mainstream horror fact about H.H. Holmes, the notorious murder castle builder in late 19th century Chicago. Holmes constructed a hotel specifically designed for killing, with secret passages, soundproof rooms, and chutes to the basement. It was a structure built not for living, but for an intensely private, meticulous, and horrifying purpose. The attic's clutter feels less murderous, but equally meticulous. You dig deeper, pulling out a heavy canvas sack. Inside are reels of thick, industrial-grade copper wiring, all coiled up, but some of the ends are stripped, ready for connection. This isn't just stringing up a porch light, this is something else. You also pull out a small hardcover notebook, its pages thin and covered in spidery, precise handwriting. A journal, you realize, belonging to the man of the house, the vanished Mr. Blackwood. The entries are initially mundane, focused on the weather and supply runs, but they quickly devolve into discussions of load balancing and the sympathetic conductivity of October. You make a mental note to read it later. A cool draft suddenly slips past you. You turn and look out the narrow attic window. The view is mostly of the tangled branches of the back hedges, but it's what's not there that catches your attention. The neighbors' houses are visible through the gaps in the leaves, and they are all, without exception, beginning to show the early signs of their seasonal transformation. You see a few oversized, inflated ghosts swaying in a yard, and a house across the street has already begun to hang black netting over its porch. The town is gearing up. It's an odd, almost forgotten piece of lore that pops into your head now, the fringe tidbit that some old-world European villages used to practice mourning silence on the eve of Samhain. It wasn't about respecting the dead, but about silencing yourself to listen for the faint, vibrational sound of the veil thinning. They believed any loud noise could accidentally rip the barrier open, inviting things that were merely listening to cross over. Here, in this quiet attic, surrounded by the remnants of Blackwood's obsession, the silence feels less like peace and more like a held breath, waiting for a noise to begin. You close the lid on the trunk. Maybe Blackwood just really liked Halloween. Researchers disagree on whether the human brain has a specific horror reaction center, or if the feeling of fear is simply a complex synthesis of basic survival instincts, threat assessment, and cultural conditioning. Maybe this whole strange town is just culturally conditioned to love the macabre. You need to keep unpacking. You grab the first box of your own books to bring down, and you nearly drop it when you see what you've left on the windowsill. One of Blackwood's papier-mâché pumpkin faces, the one you picked up earlier, is now sitting right at the center of the window ledge, as if positioned to watch the street. You hadn't put it there. You know you hadn't. You try to laugh it off. I must be more tired than I thought. I'm already decorating for the dead, you quip, but you don't feel the least bit amused. You push the pumpkin to the side. You need to stop looking up and start looking ahead. You manage to ignore the pumpkin for the rest of the day, attributing its sudden shift to a brief, stress-induced hallucination, or, more likely, a structural wobble that nudged it into place. You focus on the task at hand, creating a livable space in a house that feels actively resistant to the concept of living. The second day, you venture into town. You need groceries, and you need to sign a few final papers at the town hall. You drive down Main Street past the local businesses, a bookstore with a hand-painted sign that reads, "We've got ghost stories," and a hardware store with an entire window display dedicated to fog machines and tombstone props. The town, as advertised, is already deep into the spirit of the season. The people are friendly, too friendly, almost unnervingly so. At the supermarket, the checker, an older woman with bright, unsettlingly clear eyes, pauses after scanning your milk. "New to Blackwood Manor, aren't you?" she asks, not a question but a statement. You confirm it. She just smiles, a wide, unsettlingly vague expression. "You'll like it here. It's a house that likes the season, you see. It really comes alive around Halloween." You nod politely, trying to appear unbothered, though the phrase comes alive, echoes in your head, cold and metallic. You respond with a tired joke. Well, I hope it doesn't come too alive. I hate doing chores for the spirits. They never tip. You try to steer the conversation toward the Blackwoods. She deflects smoothly. Wonderful family. Love the holidays, she says, her eyes drifting upward, as if looking beyond you, through the roof of the store. Every local you talk to seems to share this same peculiar habit. They are warm, welcoming, and every single one of them, when the Blackwood house comes up, lets their gaze drift up. Not at your face, but over your shoulder or toward the ceiling. They are friendly, but their eyes are always flickering to your roof, sharing a secret you're not in on. This collective behavior starts to grate on your nerves. At the town hall, the clerk who handles your utility hookup, a young man with a fidgeting energy, asks if you've seen the lights yet. When you say no, that the power is still spotty, he looks genuinely disappointed. Oh, you will. It always lights up, he says with a strange, possessive pride. And again, his eyes flick up, as if expecting the ceiling tiles to start twinkling. It's an unspoken consensus, a shared, anticipated performance that your house is apparently famous for. It's like everyone is waiting for the start of a show, and you are currently standing on the empty, unlit stage. You drive back to the house feeling a cold knot of anxiety tightening in your stomach. You pull into the driveway, and this time, you don't just see the house, you see it through the lens of the entire town's anticipation. It's no longer just your fixer-upper. It's an icon, a seasonal landmark, and it's currently letting the entire town down by being dark. You're reminded of a historical fact. During the London Great Smog of 1952, the thick, toxic air was so dense that people couldn't see their own feet, and many houses had to keep their lights on all day. The lack of visibility led to accidents and a pervasive, existential fear, the terror of a world suddenly gone blind. Your house, right now, feels like it's enveloped in its own personal, light-blocking fog of refusal. You climb the stairs again, drawn by a perverse curiosity, heading straight for the attic. You need to know what Mr. Blackwood was famous for. You need to understand the source of the town's quiet, communal expectation. You find the journal you'd spotted the day before and take it to the narrow window, wiping the dust away so you can read. The handwriting is meticulous, the ink faded brown. You flip through the first few pages, which describe the process of acquiring the house and his initial ideas. He speaks of Halloween as the apex of the year, the time when the current is strongest. Then you get to a section titled Illumination Theory, written a few weeks after the start of his residency. He writes, "The challenge is not the wire, the challenge is the will." The town is a vast, unconscious generator of seasonal energy. All that fear, all that synthetic joy, all that anticipation, it has to go somewhere. It is an electromagnetic pulse of communal feeling. I merely need to provide the conductor. He then details the process of laying hundreds of feet of wiring, not just on the exterior, but within the walls, snaking through the floors and the space between the plaster and the lath. It's not just for show, it's a circuit board built into the very bones of the house. You recall an obscure tidbit about certain rural superstitions, the belief in a psychomantium, a specific type of room or chamber used in ancient times, often lined with mirrors or reflective surfaces to aid in communication with the dead. The underlying idea is that a physical space, when correctly prepared, can focus energy or consciousness. Mr. Blackwood's house, with its interior wiring grid, suddenly feels like a giant, horrifyingly cheerful psychomantium. You shut the journal, the paper feeling rough and cold in your hands. This wasn't about decorations. It was an experiment, a terrifying long-term experiment. You try to lighten the mood with a bit of dark wit. I guess this is why the inspector didn't mention the optional full house emotional energy siphon package in the closing documents. You look toward the small, narrow window and see that the single papier-mâché pumpkin you'd pushed aside yesterday is now positioned directly in the center of the sill again, its hollow eyes pointed out to the street. And as you stare at it, you suddenly notice something else, something small, nestled right next to the pumpkin on the sill. It's a tiny, clear, glass-covered light bulb, the kind used for miniature strings of decorative lights. You reach out, your fingers hovering over it. It isn't connected to anything. It's just sitting there, a single, isolated orange teardrop of glass. You realize you've been holding your breath. Researchers disagree on whether the phenomenon of infrasound, low-frequency sound waves below 20 Hz, Hers is older that the human ear cannot consciously detect, is directly responsible for feelings of dread and haunting sensations, or if the correlation is merely coincidental. You wonder if Blackwood's wiring was designed not to carry electricity, but to conduct some other kind of wave, a current of pure, unsettling frequency. You stand up, deciding you've had enough investigation for one day. You'll be calling the electrician first thing in the morning. As you turn to leave the attic, a soft, almost imperceptible flicker of light catches the corner of your eye. You turn back, slowly, your heart hammering a hard rhythm against your ribs. The light isn't coming from the small, unconnected bulb in the window. It's coming from the attic window itself. A single, orange bulb, much larger than the tiny one, but the exact same shade of electric orange, has suddenly flickered to life in the very center of the window, right next to the pumpkin. It's impossibly bright, a blazing spot in the gray afternoon, and you immediately confirm the sickening truth. Its cord is dangling right beneath it, disconnected, a frayed copper end nowhere near an outlet. The blood drains from your face, leaving you with that cold, hollow feeling that precedes true panic. You stand frozen, staring at the bulb. It's an undeniable violation of physics, a glowing orange thumbprint on the oppressive gray of the afternoon. It's a clear, bright statement. The house is not waiting for a connection from the outside, it's powering itself. You take a tentative step closer, your shadow stretching long and distorted behind you in the weird artificial light. You reach out slowly, your fingers trembling. The glass is warm, surprisingly warm, radiating a gentle heat that feels utterly wrong. You can't stay up here. The urge to flee is overwhelming, but you force yourself to take one last rational action. You grab the single bulb, it's screwed into a small plastic mounting, the kind used for an elaborate exterior string, and you rip it out of the mounting. The bright, impossible light vanishes, plunging the attic back into its dusty gloom. The heat dissipates instantly. You stand there in the dark, clutching the hot glass in your hand, listening to your own ragged breathing. You can hear the silence of the house resume, but now it feels like a heavy, judgmental silence, the sound of a performer waiting for you to realize your error. You drop the bulb into your pocket-proof and scramble down the stairs. The moment you get to the second-floor landing, you run to the phone and dial the number for the local electrician. You don't try to explain the glowing, unplugged bulb. You just tell him you have serious and immediate wiring concerns in the old Blackwood place, and that you need him out now. He agrees to come early the next morning. The rest of the evening is spent in a state of hyper-awareness. You're unpacking, but you keep glancing at the windows, expecting to see the first bulb reappear, or a dozen others to join it. You try to focus on Mr. Blackwood's journals, the spidery writing, a kind of anchor in the surreal nature of the house. You learn that his full name was Elias Blackwood, and his obsession wasn't just with decoration, but with architectural sympathy. His entries detail the slow, deliberate process of converting his home into a single, cohesive, seasonal apparatus. He called the whole system the spectacle. He writes, "October is the high tide of communal anticipation. The sheer will of a town that loves to be afraid generates a field, a kind of psychic electricity. My wiring is the antenna, and the house is the battery. It will draw from the town, not the power grid. It will be the only house in the county with a soul of pure light." He meticulously details the type of copper wiring, the specific ferrite core he installed in the basement to rectify the spiritual current, and his frustration that the municipal grid was constantly contaminating the pure charge. This brings to mind the mainstream scary fact about the Winchester mystery house in California. After her husband and child died, Sarah Winchester, the heir to the Winchester Repeating Arms fortune, was convinced she was haunted by the spirits of those killed by Winchester rifles. She continuously built onto her house for 38 years, creating staircases that lead to ceilings, doors that open to blank walls, and rooms of 13. It wasn't just construction, it was a desperate, illogical act of architectural appeasement, a life spent building a labyrinth to confuse and evade the dead. Elias Blackwood's house, though simpler, feels similarly driven by a relentless, illogical purpose. You flip a few pages in the journal. His entries become more manic, less technical. He begins to refer to the lighting elements as eyes and watchers. He speaks of the house as a living thing, a conduit of a growing, focused energy. He was clearly unstable, an electrical engineer who had spiraled into something occult and frightening. You try to make a dark joke about his fate, a nervous release. At least I know what to tell my insurance agent. A seasonal poltergeist is overloading the self-contained emotional current generator. That should cover it. Later that night, the fear keeps you awake. You hear faint scratching in the walls. Mice, you assume. But in your current state, it sounds like tiny, meticulous fingers stripping wire. You remember the obscure tidbit that in some cultures the sound of tapping or scratching within walls is not a sign of rodents, but the communication of a fetch ghost, an entity mimicking the sounds of the living to draw them into a vulnerable state. You finally fall asleep, but only for a few hours. When you wake up, the room is still dark. You reach into your pocket and pull out the little burnt-out bulb you'd ripped from the mounting. You examine it closely, finding a minuscule, almost invisible scorch mark on the glass. A proof of heat, proof of power. You spend the morning waiting for the electrician, pacing the foyer. When the van pulls up, you rush out. His name is Frank, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard and the weary, slightly cynical look of a man who has seen every kind of home repair lunacy. He is the anchor of sanity you desperately need. You take him straight to the attic. He's professional, climbing the steps with a heavy, practiced ease. He stops short in the center of the attic. "Well, this is a lot of wiring," he mutters, looking at the coiled copper and the strange schematics scattered on the floor. You show him the spot on the windowsill where the bulb had lit up, and you show him the mounting with the exposed, severed cord dangling beneath it. Frank kneels down, pulls out a circuit tester, and touches the exposed wires. He checks the wires above the window. He checks the small junction box in the corner. He even checks the old, brittle service cord leading down the wall. His face, initially skeptical, slowly shifts to one of deep confusion. He tests the dangling wire again, holding the meter up to the light. He sighs, shaking his head. "Look," he says, his voice flat. "There's no power. Not here, not anywhere along this line. It's a completely dead circuit. The house is disconnected from the main street line at the pole, just like you said. You pulled a scorched bulb from your pocket, but this was glowing, brightly, right here, with this cord dangling." He stares at the bulb, then at the dangling cord. He tests the cord again, then tests the metal frame of the window. Nothing. He looks back at you, a troubled, unreadable expression on his face. "Kid," he says, "I don't know what you saw. Maybe sun glare, maybe a reflection. But I'm telling you, this house is a beautiful old mess, and it has no power running to it, period." Researchers still argue whether the phenomenon of residual haunting, where a ghost is merely a recording of a past event replaying in a specific location, is a physical phenomenon tied to materials like quartz or limestone, or a purely psychological effect on the observer. Frank is clearly opting for a psychological explanation. You, however, know exactly what you saw. The house had power. It just didn't get it from the utility company. Frank packs up his tools, clearly eager to leave. He gives you a final, bewildered look. You try one last desperate joke to break the tension. "So, you're saying I have to get my electricity from the municipal power company? Bummer. I was hoping for a discount from the resident ghost." He doesn't smile. He just shakes his head, walking quickly down the stairs. The house is completely dark, completely dead, and yet, you know with sickening certainty, it has just enough energy to put on a show. Frank's hasty departure leaves you feeling more isolated than before. His professional dismissal of the event, the sun glare reflection hypothesis, didn't just invalidate your experience, it left the entire mystery intact, cloaked in an even more unsettling air of impossibility. You had hoped for a simple, mundane fix. Instead, you got a bewildered electrician who now probably thinks you're crazy. You retreat to the ground floor, needing a break from the attic and the cold logic of Elias Blackwood's madness. You wander into the living room, a space you've barely touched. It's dominated by a massive old fireplace. Above the mantelpiece, you notice a collection of built-in shelves. They're empty, save for a few forgotten items. A single heavy brass candlestick, a desiccated cluster of ivy, and a small leather-bound volume that is not a journal, but a book of local folklore. You grab it and settle onto a dusty couch. The book is filled with the kind of quaint, unsettling tales that small towns cherish. Stories of a local Civil War soldier who still walks the fields on the anniversary of his death, a lake spirit that pulls down small boats, and, inevitably, a whole section dedicated to the Blackwood house. The title of the chapter makes your heart sink, The Silent Spectacle. The book confirms what the townspeople alluded to. Every Halloween, starting a few years after Elias Blackwood moved in, the house would spontaneously light up, not just a few porch lights, but an elaborate, overwhelming display. The book describes it as a tapestry of impossible light, a system that seemed to ignore the wiring of the house and the municipal grid entirely. It was a local phenomenon, a source of pride and deep superstitious awe. The author, writing in the early 1990s, recounts how crowds would gather across the street, waiting for the house to turn itself on. There's a grainy black and white photo of the house, completely covered in what looks like a dizzying, intricate net of bright, glowing bulbs. It's beautiful and deeply disturbing. The book also reveals the crucial mainstream horror fact about the house's history that the realtor conveniently omitted. The Blackwoods vanished on Halloween night. It wasn't a sudden death or a foreclosure. It was an unexplained disappearance. The house was found locked from the inside, the lights blazing brightly, the dinner table set for 3 with untouched plates of food. Every local official, the book notes, assumed they had simply run away, driven mad by Blackwood's obsession, but the lack of a note, a struggle, or any sign of a break-in left the case open and perpetually cold. The house was left to darkness for decades until you, in your charming naivety, bought it. You mutter a tired, dark joke into the silence. Looks like this house doesn't just come with an HOA fee, it comes with a complete history of spontaneous human combustion. That's premium real estate. You close the book, the leather cool against your palm. You're sitting in a house that actively consumed its last occupants. You run your hand across the dusty mantelpiece, and you realize you haven't yet addressed the original source of the strangeness, the attic. The journal is still up there, and you know, deep down, that the answer to why the house did this is locked away in Blackwood's increasingly unhinged thoughts. You make your way back up. Cautiously, you reach the top step, and the hair on the back of your neck stands up. You stop. You don't need to enter to know. You can see it from the doorway. It's the second, more terrifying violation of the laws of nature. The single, thin attic window, which you had left completely dark, is now a portrait of seasonal dread. The missing orange bulb, the one you had ripped out and pocketed, is back in its socket, glowing with the same aggressive, impossible light. And it is not alone. Arrayed along the edges of the window frame, following the intricate lines of the wood, are 4 more orange bulbs, each one precisely placed, each one burning bright. Their cords hang down, thin black threads dangling in the air, completely unplugged. The bulbs have simply appeared and powered themselves. You had checked the wire, Frank had checked the wire. It was dead. Yet here is the proof, a small constellation of 5 orange lights burning with a silent internal fire. You reach into your pocket, and your fingers close around the warm, small, scorched bulb you had taken the day before. The light in your hand is the one you ripped out. The light in the window is a replacement. The house repaired itself. You feel a wave of nausea, a dizzying sense of not being able to trust your own senses. You look closer at the arrangement of the 5 bulbs. They are positioned to look like a tiny, stylized pumpkin face against the dark glass. 2 for eyes, 2 for a nose, and 1 for a simple, curved mouth. It is the beginning of the spectacle, the first layer of the impossible display. This reminds you of a fringe tidbit of ghost lore, the belief in object materialization often associated with aggressive poltergeist activity. It's the idea that a high concentration of psychic or unknown energy can physically manifest objects or recreate things that were forcefully removed. The house didn't just turn on a light, it regrew one. You whisper a joke, your voice thin and shaking. Well, I guess this house is a perfectionist. I shouldn't have disturbed the feng shui of the seasonal energy conduit. I'll make sure to use a coaster next time. You move toward the window, your steps heavy. You have to stop this, or at least understand the mechanism. You open the journal and frantically scan for a clue about the lights reappearing. You find a short, chilling entry from a few weeks before Blackwood vanished. I have discovered the nature of the connection. The external wiring is a redundancy. The true power is in the structure itself. The light is a projection of the house's anticipation. The spectacle does not need me to turn it on. It only requires the town to expect it. I am merely the conduit for the initial design, the architectural template for the coming light. You realize with a sickening jolt what that means. The house has learned the design. It knows exactly where the lights are supposed to be, and the town's collective, annual expectation is the source of the impossible energy. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of the electric chair was truly a more humane alternative to hanging, or simply a public spectacle intended to reinforce the state's power over life and death. The debate hinges on the ethical use of technology for terrifying effect. Blackwood's house is doing the same thing, using a facade of technology to enact a ritualistic, terrifying performance. The lights are back on, and this time, you know they are not going to be easy to turn off. The 5 orange pinpricks in the attic window are a tiny defiant beacon, a glowing signature scrawled across the dark face of the old house. They are an opening note in a silent building symphony, and you realize you have to do more than just rip out the bulbs. You have to dismantle the entire system. You return to the journal, your hands no longer trembling from fear, but from a desperate, focused determination. Elias Blackwood's increasingly unhinged entries are the only map you have through the house's growing psychosis. You carry the journal back downstairs, settling at the kitchen table, the most modern, and therefore, you hope, the most grounded room in the house. You spread out the electrical diagrams you found, meticulously drawn, almost artistic renderings of wiring that trace paths through every wall, every ceiling joist, and every floorboard. This is no normal wiring job. It's a circuit board built into the structure. You can see lines traced in red ink that loop around the main fireplace, then snake up the exterior walls and into the attic, all labeled with terms like harmonic loop and inertial current collector. You focus on the journal's section titled The Silent Spectacle, which details his method of energy capture. You theorize that the collective energy of the town's holiday anticipation acted like a colossal electromagnetic field, and his house, with its copper lattice skeleton, was designed to draw that energy inward. He speaks of it less as power and more as a sympathy of current. His final technical entries are an agonizing read, full of crossed-out math and desperate footnotes about the ferrite core he installed in the basement to stabilize the wild charge. You try to find a mention of his disappearance, a final conclusive entry, but there is nothing. The journal simply ends mid-sentence on October 31st, roughly 20 years ago. The main circuit is finally closed. The energy surge is, and then blank page. The last sentence is a terrifying non-ending, a narrative vacuum that perfectly mirrors the town's official story of his vanishing. You take a deep breath, needing to inject some levity to avoid dissolving into a puddle of existential dread. Well, that's great. The house's owner got vaporized by his own artisanal, seasonal power plant. I'm starting to think the welcome mat should just say, abandon all hope, and your security deposit. Driven by the need for external objective information, you decide to make a trip to the public library. It's a beautifully preserved brick building, the kind that smells pleasantly of old paper and dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun. You head straight for the local history archives. You confirm the mainstream scary fact you'd learned from the local folklore book, The Vanishing of the Blackwoods, a case the police closed as a voluntary disappearance, despite the locked doors, set table, and the still blazing lights on the house. You find another piece of local history, a news clipping from the time of the event. It quotes a neighbor who described the spectacle on the night of the disappearance. It wasn't like Christmas lights, you know. It was alive. They were pulsing, almost breathing, and the color was too bright. It was a terrible, beautiful thing. It's the pulse that chills you, not a flicker, but a rhythmic beat, a heartbeat. You continue your research and find a peculiar old treatise on regional superstition and architecture. It details the obscure or fringe tidbit of an ancient local belief in stone sympathy. The idea that a house built on certain ley line adjacent earth could, over decades, develop a kind of spiritual sentience. The house would begin to reflect the dominant emotion of its inhabitants, eventually drawing that emotion out of them and consuming it. It's an architectural form of vampirism. For the Blackwoods, that dominant emotion was a frantic, meticulous, and ultimately unstable passion for the macabre. The house was now feeding on the town's seasonal fear and fun, and Mr. Blackwood's wiring was simply the feeding tube. You pull out your phone and discreetly search for the fate of Elias Blackwood's young daughter, who'd also disappeared with him. No records of a body, no sign of her. You imagine her little hand-drawn pictures, maybe a stick figure drawing of the house, all lit up and smiling, the way her father wanted it to be seen. You imagine her sitting at that set table, waiting for the dinner that never started, as the house around her erupted in its terrible final light. You close the book, the weight of the Blackwood family's fate settling heavily on your shoulders. You realize the house wasn't just performing for the town, it was performing for itself, and you, the new owner, were now standing in the spotlight. You leave the library, the setting sun casting long orange shadows across the pavement. The air is colder, and you feel the magnetic pull of the house. You try to anchor yourself in the rational. Researchers disagree on whether the uncanny valley effect, the sense of unease we feel when something looks almost human but not quite, is a hardwired defense mechanism against disease or a learned response to social ambiguity. The lights in your attic are definitely in the uncanny valley of electrical phenomenon. They look like lights, but they are wrong. You drive home. As you round the final corner, the house comes into view, silhouetted against the indigo sky. And that's when you see it. It's no longer 5 lights. Along the eaves of the roofline, following the exact path indicated in Blackwood's schematic drawings, the lights have multiplied. Now there are dozens, a long, snaking string of brilliant orange bulbs running from the attic window, across the roof peak, and down the side of the house. They are spaced with perfect, agonizing precision. The full circuit hasn't ignited, but this is clearly the second phase of the spectacle. They're a bright, blazing line in the twilight, a terrifyingly cheerful boundary against the dark. And just like the first 5, their wires dangle freely in the air, unconnected to any power source. They are drawing their energy from the ether, from the town, from the growing sense of dread in your own chest. And as you pull into the driveway, you hear it. It's faint, muffled, and coming from inside the walls. A low, wheezing, staticky music. It sounds like an ancient calliope playing a warped funhouse tune. The house is not just lighting up by itself, it's creating its own soundtrack. You sit in the car for a long minute, engine idling, staring at the blazing orange line across your roof. The sheer audacity of the house, the complete aggressive disregard for the laws of physics, is almost breathtaking. It's not a malfunction, it's a deliberate, successful act of architectural magic. The staticky calliope music, faint but distinct, is the final, horrible insult. It sounds like an antique music box that's been submerged in water for 20 years, warped and thin, but still recognizable as a circus waltz. The sound is undeniably coming from within the walls, a soft, vibrating hum that you feel more than hear. You finally cut the engine and step out. You walk slowly toward the house, your eyes glued to the impossible illumination. The lights are not flickering randomly, they are steady, a solid line of orange flame. They have a quality to them that is too rich, too saturated to be normal incandescent bulbs. They look less like light and more like trapped, solidified heat. You enter the house, and the low, wheezing music is louder here, resonating through the floorboards and up the main staircase. It's an old, repetitive melody, one of those tunes that loop endlessly in cheap nightmares. The walls are acting as a sounding board, a giant, enclosed speaker system for the house's private concert. You realize you haven't heard this sound before because the house needed a certain threshold of power, the lights, to begin to resonate with sound. The unplugged orchestra has begun its performance. You try to find the source. You press your ear against the wall in the foyer. The sound is strongest there. You can feel the faint, high-frequency vibration of the music in the plaster. You pound on the wall once, hard, hoping to startle the sound into silence, but the music simply absorbs the shock, continuing its thin, cheerful waltz without missing a beat. You crack a dark joke, your voice strained. This house is so bad at being a haunted house. It needs to pick a better playlist, something with more doom, less polka. You retreat to the kitchen, needing something solid and predictable. You pull out Elias Blackwood's journal and flip to the pages detailing the sound element. He writes of this specifically in a section titled Acoustic Sympathy. He theorized that the same energetic field that powers the lights can be modulated into sound waves. He writes, "The fear must be accompanied by gaiety. The true horror is the smile on the skull. The gaiety focuses the fear, giving the energy form. The music is the final conductor." He even specifies the type of music he would play. The tinny, repetitive sounds of an antique music box or calliope, the sound of cheap, mechanical, and slightly terrifying joy. You realize the music isn't a byproduct of the power, it's a necessary component of the spectacle. It's the final layer of the ritual. This level of meticulous, personalized terror reminds you of the mainstream horror fact about the Issei Sagawa case. Sagawa, a Japanese student in Paris, committed a horrifying act of cannibalism. Yet due to a loophole and a declaration of insanity, he was released and returned to Japan, where he lived freely, even achieving minor celebrity status. The true horror isn't the act itself, but the surreal, unsettling way that society bent to accommodate the monster, allowing the terror to continue existing in the mundane world. Your house is doing the same thing. It's a magnificent, beautiful violation of reality, and the town is embracing it as a charming seasonal quirk. You feel the need to see the lights again, to understand the sheer scale of Blackwood's successful madness. You climb the main staircase. The music follows you, seeming to rise and fall with the pitch of your steps. When you reach the second floor, you walk to the large window in the master bedroom, which offers a perfect view of the roofline. The lights are not simply on, they are pulsing. Not a quick blink, but a slow, deliberate contraction and expansion of brightness, perfectly in time with the wheezing, internal music. The pulse is like a slow, rhythmic inhale and exhale of light. The effect is mesmerizing and deeply terrifying. You remember the obscure or fringe tidbit of ghost lore about sympathetic resonance, the belief that certain locations, usually ancient ruins or churches, can hold an emotional charge that vibrates through the atmosphere, affecting the mental state of anyone who stays there. Blackwood's house is proof that this energy can be engineered, collected, and transformed into a visible, audible, tangible force. You look down at the street. A few cars are driving by slowly. They are stopping briefly across the street, their occupants pointing up at your house. They aren't terrified, they are admiring it. They are the audience. They are also, in a way, the battery. You look back at the pulsing light and have a chilling realization. The lines of lights are not random. They are following the copper lattice, Blackwood detailed in his drawings. They are forming an intricate pattern, a design that is slowly being filled in, bulb by bulb. They are tracing the invisible skeleton of the house's energy system. You reach out and touch the window pane. It feels cold. But as you watch the lights pulse, you realize that the energy isn't just outside. It's coming from through the wall. You move your hand to the plaster of the interior wall, and this time you can feel the faint warmth and the soft vibration of the music. The house itself is becoming charged. You turn away from the window, the pulse of light imprinted on your vision. You need to sleep, but the idea of lying down with the house breathing around you, the music playing your funeral march, is intolerable. You need a final, desperate attempt at humor. Blackwood's true invention wasn't the seasonal energy siphon, but a really bad noise machine. No wonder he disappeared. He just couldn't stand his own playlist. The actors. Researchers disagree on whether the phenomenon of sleep paralysis, where a person wakes up unable to move and often sees a menacing figure, is purely a neurological glitch involving REM sleep, or if the consistent cultural and historical accounts point to a less understood, shared external phenomenon. For you, right now, the only thing keeping you from sleep paralysis is the constant, loud, rhythmic pulse of the house. You decide the only place you can be relatively safe is back in the attic, in the dark, cold heart of the monster, with Blackwood's journal open. You need to figure out the kill switch. The pulsating, wheezing music is a constant companion as you return to the attic. The volume hasn't increased, but the sheer predictability of the repetitive, tinny waltz, the same 4 bars, over and over, punctuated by the rhythmic expansion and contraction of the lights, is wearing down your sanity like a relentless, tiny hammer. You can feel the energy of the house now, a faint high-tension static that makes the tiny hairs on your arms stand up. You spread the electrical diagrams and the journal out on the dusty floor, illuminated by the beam of your phone. You're no engineer, but you can understand the basics of Blackwood's intent. The house is a gigantic, closed-loop receiver. It's not taking energy from a direct source. It's harvesting the ambient, low-frequency emotion of the town and converting it into light and sound. The key, you realize, has to be the ferrite core he mentioned, the rectifier he installed in the basement. It's the heart of the system, the part that converts the psychic current into a physical, usable power source. You climb down to the first floor and head for the basement door, a heavy, unpainted slab of wood hidden at the back of the pantry. You pull it open, and the air that rushes out is colder, damper, and carries a strange, coppery smell. You flip the switch for the basement light, but of course, nothing happens. The house is running on its own power, not the grid. You descend the narrow, creaking wooden steps. The beam of your flashlight cuts through the darkness, illuminating a low-ceilinged space with an uneven dirt floor. It's a classic, terrifying basement, stone foundation, exposed pipes, and shadows that seem to move just outside the cone of your light. You have the sudden, horrible thought that this is the kind of place where a person might disappear without a trace. You try to scoff off the fear with a shaky laugh. If I get lost down here, please tell the police I was last seen complaining about the plumbing. You search the space, looking for anything that doesn't look like simple, ancient support beams or plumbing. Then, in a corner bolted to the stone foundation, you find it. It's a wooden box about the size of a microwave with a hinged lid, covered in a patina of decades of basement damp. Thick copper cables, the same kind Blackwood used in the attic, sprout from all sides of the box and disappear into the walls. This is the ferrite core, the structural battery of the spectacle. You try the lid. It's locked. There's a heavy brass padlock that is oxidized with age. You bang on the box, hoping to disrupt the circuit, but the only response is a faint, resonant hum from within. You can feel the energy in it now, a palpable vibration through your fingertips. It feels like a sleeping, mechanized animal. You need a key or a crowbar. You don't have either. You climb back out of the basement, securing the heavy door. You have a target, but you have no means of disabling it. You need a rational explanation for the local authorities, a way to get someone to force the box open. But who would believe you? The electrician, Frank, was your last, best hope for rational intervention, and he fled. The mainstream scary fact about the real-life Amityville horror house comes to mind. Even after the Lutz family fled, claiming demonic possession and paranormal attacks, the house remained standing, a focal point of dark tourism and public fascination, continuing to draw attention and perpetuate its own horrifying legend. The house became the monster. Your house is doing the same thing. It is generating its own horror, and the town is validating it. You decide to drive to the nearest hardware store, an old-fashioned place you'd passed on your first day. You need a crowbar and a heavy-duty padlock cutter. You leave the house, and as you back out of the driveway, you look up. The line of pulsing orange lights has multiplied again. The lights now cover half of the main roof line, reaching toward the back of the house. They are like a glowing infestation covering the structure with an organized, cheerful disease. As you head back, the store is closed. A note on the door says, "Gone for the night. Prepping for the 31st. See you when the fun starts." The whole town is already shutting down, preparing for the apex of Blackwood's terrifying energy harvest. You drive back, defeated. The house is waiting. And now, as you pull back into the driveway, you see the next terrifying phase of the illumination. The lights are no longer just a line. They are mapping something. They have snaked down the side of the house, and on the second-floor wall, they have created a perfect, glowing outline of a small human figure, arms outstretched. The line is thin, orange, and precise, a horrifying chalk outline made of pure, self-generated light. It is a silhouette of Amelia Blackwood, frozen in the act of reaching out. This brings to mind the obscure or fringe tidbit of ghost lore about shadow people, entities described as dark, vaguely human shapes seen in peripheral vision. The underlying superstition is that these are not ghosts, but beings that exist on a different vibrational plane, occasionally bleeding through into our reality. Your house has gone beyond an ambiguous shadow. It has illuminated an impossible, static memory, giving the memory a specific luminous form. You stare at the glowing outline of the little girl, the lights pulsing to the thin, distorted calliope music. It is a moment of pure, petrifying terror. You manage a final, desperate, dark joke. "I knew I should have bought a house with better curb appeal. This place comes with complimentary, light-up evidence of a decades-old crime." You park the car and run inside. You realize the system is nearing completion. Blackwood's journal said the house was the architectural template. The lights are no longer random decorations. They are the living blueprint of the energy system itself. And that outline of the child, that's not just a decoration, it's part of the circuit. The lights are drawing their power from an unknown source that is now so strong, so concentrated, that it makes your teeth ache with a faint, high-frequency thrum. The literal sound of the spectacle's energy charging the house's very structure. You have to break the lock on the box. You have to find a way to silence the house before the pattern is complete. The glowing silhouette of the little girl on the side of your house is a punch to the gut. It's no longer about abstract, unexplained power. It's personal. It's a crime scene illuminated by its own terrible, rhythmic energy. You enter the house, the wheezing calliope music immediately assaulting your ears, and you head straight for the one place you might find a tool, the box of your own belongings marked workshop. You tear into the box, spilling wrenches, screwdrivers, and various bits of hardware across the dusty kitchen floor. You find what you're looking for, a heavy-duty, long-handled pair of bolt cutters. Ironically, tools you brought for potential landscaping work. You grab them, the cool steel, a comforting weight in your hand, a physical object of rational destruction. You descend into the basement again, the flashlight beam dancing nervously across the dirt floor. The music is muted down here, absorbed by the earth and stone, replaced by the faint, coppery hum of the main power box. The air is still cold and damp, but now it feels charged, like the air right before a severe thunderstorm. You find the wooden box, Blackwood's ferrite core. You kneel before it, the bolt cutters in your hands. You look closely at the brass padlock. It's old, heavy, and firmly affixed to the hinge. You position the open jaws of the cutter around the padlock's thick shackle. You squeeze. The metal groans, a high-pitched protesting whine, and then, with a sharp, echoing crack, the shackle snaps. The padlock falls to the dirt with a thud, and you toss the broken pieces aside. You've breached the spectacle's heart. You throw open the lid of the wooden box. Inside, it's a chaotic mess of wiring, but dominated by a single, dark, oddly shaped block of something metallic, the ferrite core. Wires from the walls, ceiling, and floor are all meticulously soldered to terminals on the central block. The block itself is pulsating with a barely visible, low-level blue-white light, and the humming sound is coming directly from it. You can feel the charge in the air, thick and metallic, making your teeth ache. This is the source. You have to disrupt the circuit. You grab the first thick copper wire you can reach and position the bolt cutters around it. You hesitate. What if disrupting the circuit doesn't stop it, but merely causes a catastrophic feedback loop? What if this sympathetic current is so powerful that breaking the wire causes an explosion? You remember the mainstream scary fact that the crypto sculpture at the CIA headquarters contains an encrypted message that remains only partially solved. The horror is in the known, unknown, the certainty that a secret exists, but the inability to fully decipher it. Blackwood's entire system is a physical cryptos, a terrifying circuit you can't fully understand. You can't wait, you have to cut. You snip the first wire. Snap. The sound is shockingly loud. For a heartbeat, everything goes silent. The low hum stops. You wait, breath held. Then, a second later, the hum returns, exactly the same, only slightly higher in pitch. The pulsing blue-white light on the core dims for a moment, then surges back, brighter than before. You check the severed wire. It's dead, but the core is still running. You realize the core is redundant. It's designed to run on a network, and a single broken wire won't stop it. You need to take the entire core offline. You check Blackwood's journal again, frantic now, scanning for a kill switch. You flip to the final page you read, the one ending mid-sentence, and then you see a small, almost invisible annotation in the bottom margin, written in pencil, "Disrupt the final terminal." The power of the town's gaze is now its only weakness. You look back at the core. There is one terminal labeled Omega that has a heavy, braided cable leading out of it and disappearing through a small hole in the foundation wall, clearly leading outside. You recognize this cable from Blackwood's early diagrams. It was the external grounding wire, the sympathy anchor. You position the cutters on the thick cable leading to the Omega terminal. This has to be it. You close the cutters, straining against the heavy metal. Scrunch. The entire house screams. The sound is not the music. It's a deafening, high-pitched electrical shriek that makes your ears ring and your bones vibrate. The blue-white light in the core surges, blindingly bright, and then, with a sound like a wet cough, the light snaps out. Silence floods the basement, a complete, total absence of sound that is more shocking than the noise was. You stand up, heart hammering, staring at the inert, silent core. It's done. You've killed the spectacle. You race upstairs, burst out of the basement, and head for the window. You look out onto the dark roofline, ready for the sweet sight of absolute blackness. But the blackness isn't there. The lights are still on. The full line of orange bulbs still covers the half of the roof, and the little girl's silhouette is still glowing on the wall. They are no longer pulsing. They are steady and blindingly bright, the intensity of their light not diminished by the separate connection, but instead frozen at maximum output. And the music. The music is still playing, but instead of wheezing, it is now clear, sharp, and twice as loud, like the final, horrifying chorus of a mechanical symphony. You gasp, a cold wave of understanding washing over you. Blackwood's system was designed to draw energy from the town's anticipation. By disrupting the core, you didn't turn off the house, you only removed the modulator. You stopped the house from converting the energy into a rhythmic pulse and wheeze. Now, the house is just an open siphon, drawing raw, unregulated power from the entire terrified, anticipating neighborhood. You run to the attic, the music now deafening on the second floor. You look at Blackwood's journal again, flipping pages frantically. You spot a small, barely legible footnote on the omega terminal diagram. If severed prematurely, the current becomes chaotic and must find a complete circuit to discharge. The house must become fully lit to contain the wild current. You realize what's happening. The house is speeding up the process. It's forcing the completion of the spectacle to protect itself. You try a final, desperate joke, your voice raw with panic. This is what happens when you skip the instructions. I guess chaotic illumination is not covered under the limited warranty. This reminds you of an obscure or fringe tidbit of ghost lore. The belief that wildfire souls are not ghosts tied to a specific location, but pure, unanchored emotional energy that, when focused, can manifest as intense heat or light. By severing the anchor, you've unleashed the wildfire soul of the house. You look out the attic window. Already more lights are appearing, snaking across the final, unlit half of the roof, filling in the remaining empty space in the living blueprint. You can feel the immense pressure of the energy. The air is vibrating, and you can practically hear the copper wires vibrating inside the walls. The house is rushing toward its terrifying total illumination. The house is no longer building the spectacle for an audience. It's building it to survive. The sheer speed of the house's self-decoration is horrifying. It's no longer a slow, insidious creep. It's a frantic rush toward total, catastrophic illumination. You stand in the attic, surrounded by the remnants of Blackwood's obsession, watching the final sections of the spectacle snap into place. Along the roofline, down the edges of the porch, and even around the window frames, the orange bulbs are appearing, one after the other, with machine gun rapidity. They are not being plugged in, they are simply materializing into existence and immediately burning in maximum brightness. The house is literally building itself a protective Faraday cage of light. The music is a non-stop mechanical scream. The cheerful waltz now played at a frantic, impossible tempo, a soundtrack to madness. The sound and the light are a unified, physical force that presses down on you, a dizzying combination that makes it difficult to think. You stumble back from the window, grabbing Blackwood's journal again. You need to find the core purpose of this thing, not just how it works, but why it was built. You turn to the final, unpublished pages of the journal, the ones written in a hand that grows increasingly agitated and messy. Here, Blackwood drops the technical jargon and reveals his true, dark intention, the spirit of the circuit. He writes, "The town's fear is not enough. The anticipation is a vessel, but the vessel must be filled with a true, focused spark. The house, when fully lit and resonating with the frequency of terror, will not simply draw the energy of the town, it will draw the attention of the veil itself." He believed that the house, at its peak, would act as a kind of physical bridge, a glowing seasonal lure for entities that exist on the other side. "They come for the light," he scrawls. "They come for the performance, and they require an audience." It dawns on you that the Blackwood's disappearance wasn't a failure of the system, it was the crowning success. They weren't vaporized by the current, they were taken by whatever crossed the bridge the house built. They became the audience Blackwood was trying to summon. You realize the sinister mainstream scary fact at the heart of Blackwood's plan. He wasn't decorating his house, he was building a beacon for the unknown, a giant festive trap. This is reminiscent of the historical fact that many old lighthouses were built on treacherous wave-battered coastlines, and the light they projected was meant to save sailors. Yet many tales persist of the lonely keepers who were driven mad by the isolation and the relentless, hypnotic rhythm of the beam. Blackwood's house is a perverse, dark lighthouse, and its light is meant to lure things in. You look down at the street through the attic window. The town's fascination has become a problem. Cars are pulling over, people are getting out, holding their phones up. The crowd is growing, drawn by the blinding, steady, chaotic illumination. Their anticipation, their shared, excited awe and fear is the fuel. They are all looking at the house, and their collective gaze is exactly the thing that the severed circuit needs to maintain its power. The lights are drawing their energy from the gaze of the town. This reminds you of an obscure or fringe horror tidbit, the superstition of the oculus mollises or the evil eye, the belief that an intense, focused gaze can transmit harm or misfortune. In this case, the collective focused gaze of the town is not transmitting misfortune. It is transmitting power, a raw electrical sustenance that is keeping the house alive and active. You look at the blueprint again. The silhouette of the little girl, Amelia, is a key component. The outline is the perfect, terrifyingly cheerful drawing of a child's silhouette. It's a lure, a symbol. It's what came out of the Blackwood's last holiday. You realize Blackwood's genius in his madness. He engineered a ghost story and then gave the ghost story the power to tell itself. You manage a single, dry, desperate joke, your voice barely audible over the screaming music. I should have hired a professional decorator. This house has gone from curb appeal to curb stomp appeal in about 24 hours. You realize there is no kill switch, not anymore. You can't stop the energy flow because the source is intangible. It's the will and expectation of the entire community. You can't break the circuit again. The house is already in protective mode, speeding toward total saturation. The only way to stop the spectacle is to turn off the audience. You need to make the house stop being a spectacle. Historians still argue whether the most effective tool in the Spanish Inquisition was the rack and the fire, or the slow, methodical use of psychological terror and public accusation. The house is employing both, the chaotic physical terror of the lights and the psychological torment of the relentless, cheerful music. You look at the clock on your phone. It's late on October 30th. Tomorrow is the 31st. The high tide of the sympathetic current. The day the house will be completely filled. The day the bridge will open. You have less than 24 hours. You know you can't fight the house's power. You can only fight the house's purpose. Blackwood wanted a beacon. You need to make it a fortress. You need to close the house off physically from the town. You need to block the external view to make the house invisible to the collective gaze and starve the spectacle of its fuel. You head back downstairs, the music screaming in your ears, towards the first floor where the biggest windows face the biggest audience. You need to cut the spectacle off from its life support. The house is now a single, throbbing, orange-hot entity. Every window pane, every roofline, every gutter is traced in the brilliant static light. The illumination is so total that you can walk from room to room without your flashlight. The orange glow bleeds through the walls and the ceiling, giving the entire interior a sickly, jaundiced hue. It's early morning on October 31st. The light and the mechanical scream of the calliope music are a constant physical headache, a white noise of terror. You spent the night trying to find a way to block the view from the street. You pulled down every curtain you could find, but the house has massive windows, and the old, faded drapes are thin. You even found a stack of old blankets in a hall closet and tacked them up with great difficulty over the largest windows in the living room. But the bright, chaotic energy of the house simply shines through the thin fabric, turning the blankets into glowing orange squares. The house is a light source of impossible intensity, and you can't dim it. You look out one of the narrow, unblocked side windows. The town has officially begun its holiday. Children in costumes are already visible in the distance, running along sidewalks, the excited chatter of their voices faintly audible, even over the house's deafening internal music. The foot traffic is increasing. The audience is assembling. You realize the spectacle has reached its terrible zenith. The lights are everywhere. The full architectural template Blackwood drew in his schematics is complete. You walk through the house one last time, an inspection of the completed circuit. The glowing silhouette of Amelia Blackwood is still on the side of the house, perfectly rendered, its light brighter than any other spot. But as you watch it, you notice one final subtle detail that makes your stomach clench. The light bulbs that form the girl's outstretched hand are not static. They are subtly and slowly rotating their color, from orange to a faint, pale, spectral green, before snapping back to orange. They are warming up for the main show. You think of the mainstream scary fact about the original Poltergeist film curse. The persistent urban legend that the film itself was cursed due to the use of real human skeletons as props, which was followed by a string of tragic real-life deaths of the young cast members. The house, like the film, is a vessel that has mixed the truly dark with the artificially cheerful, and the result is a dangerous, self-sustaining nightmare that feeds on its own reputation. You retreat to the foyer, the air thick with the metallic scent of static and the cloying smell of old, dried flowers. The front door is solid, heavy oak. It is currently locked, bolted, and barricaded with a heavy moving box. You stand there, leaning against the cold wall, trying to control your breathing. You are trapped inside a living, screaming, illuminated nightmare, and you can only wait for midnight. The afternoon drags on in a state of hyper-alertness. The music is a constant, grating presence. Around 5:30 p.m., as the sun begins to set, the trick-or-treaters begin to arrive in earnest. You can hear their voices outside, the excited cries and laughter of children. They stop at every other house, receiving candy and admiration for their costumes. But as they approach the Blackwood place, the mood changes. The town respects the spectacle, but they also fear it. You hear the parents' quiet words. "Don't go near that one, Ani. Just cross the street." The children follow suit. They don't walk onto your lawn. They avoid your sidewalk, crossing the street to walk on the opposite pavement, their eyes glued to the house, a mixture of awe and profound instinctual fear on their little faces. You realize this is the final, terrifying paradox of the spectacle. The town is fueling the house with its collective gaze, but they are also keeping a healthy, superstitious distance. They are the audience, but they are also smart enough to stay out of the trap. They are looking at the house, but they are refusing its open invitation. This is the fringe horror tidbit of the threshold fear, the old superstition that a malevolent entity's power is contained within the boundaries of its dwelling, and that simply stepping across the threshold is the act that subjects you to its power. The children and the parents instinctively understand this, staying on the municipal pavement, keeping the house as a powerful, terrifying object, but not a direct threat. They are looking, and by looking, they are feeding it. The music suddenly surges, the mechanical waltz skipping a beat, then roaring back at an even higher tinny pitch. You look toward the main window of the living room. The lights, all the lights, every single bulb on the exterior of the house, suddenly flicker once, like a vast electrical heart skipping a beat, and then the house erupts. The entire system, which was static and steady, is now a blinding, chaotic strobe. The lights aren't just on. They are going on and off at an impossible speed, flickering between blinding brightness and total blackness, a visual assault that turns the exterior of the house into a vibrating orange blur. The intensity is so overwhelming that you can see the light bleeding through the gaps in the door frame, painting the entire foyer in a strobing, epileptic light show of seasonal terror. And with that violent surge, the final component of the spectacle is activated. The heavy oak front door, which you personally locked, bolted, and barricaded with a moving box, doesn't just unlock. It swings open inward with a deep, dramatic whoosh of air, throwing the heavy box backward onto the floor with a crash. It stays open, revealing the dark street, the bobbing lights of the distant crowd, and the blindingly strobing facade. The house, now completely lit and screaming its music, has formally extended its open invitation. You stand alone in the foyer, facing the gaping dark maw of the doorway, framed by the chaotic, strobing light. Researchers disagree on whether the human preference for rhythm and pattern is a deeply rooted evolutionary trait tied to survival, or a learned cultural preference. The house has just broken every pattern, every rhythm, and every logical expectation you had. You try to find a final, futile joke, but your throat is dry. All you can manage is a whispered thought, "I have to close the door." The front door is a solid, black rectangle of negative space in the frenetic, strobing orange illumination. It's an impossible invitation, a deliberate theatrical gesture from the house itself. The mechanical scream of the music pours out onto the street, where the crowd of trick-or-treaters and parents have stopped, now truly terrified. Their collective, silent shock is another surge of power for the house. You can feel the energy radiating from the open doorway, a cold draft despite the electrical heat. You know you have to close it. Not just for your own safety, but to break the line of sight, to stop the town's gaze from feeding the chaotic current. You take a hesitant step toward the open door, and then another. Each step is an act of defiance against the house's will. As you get closer, the strobing light reveals the street outside in terrifying, jerky snapshots, the dark trees, the frozen expressions of the people across the street, the sidewalk empty but clearly visible. The music is an auditory wall of sound that vibrates your chest cavity. You reach the threshold and you look outside. No one is coming closer. They are all standing still, a tableau of fear and awe. Their gaze is 100 bright threads of attention, all leading directly into your open door. You can feel the energy of the gaze on your skin, a prickling sensation like a million tiny needles. You lean out and grab the heavy oak door. It is strangely warm to the touch. You pull, putting your full weight into it. The door doesn't budge. You pull again, harder, straining your muscles, but the door remains fixed, an insurmountable barrier of solid, unmoving wood. It's not just heavy, it's being held open. You look down at the floor, expecting to see a latch or a mechanism, but there's nothing. The house is keeping the door open with its sheer, overwhelming will. It wants the audience to look. It wants the open circuit. You pull one more time, a desperate, futile tug, and then you step back, defeated. The house, sensing your failure, unleashes its next terrifying move. The music suddenly changes. The frantic, screaming waltz abruptly stops, replaced by a deafening, bass-heavy thump-thump that vibrates the floorboards.